I wonder if you'd be up for doing something a little bit strange, marginally unorthodox as we begin our time together. Just with someone near you, could you give a review of the worship? Okay? Could you give a review of the worship? I know you have to present a review of me, because there's a long form about that. And we're grateful, let's say at the beginning, we're grateful for all of our musicians who have done an amazing job, but just have a little review of the worship. You'll understand why in a minute, but have a go. Yes, it was an odd thing to do, and we want to do this with honour and respect, but what were some of the things that you ended up talking about? What did you talk about? Anyone want to? This is the participatory bit where you engage with me, non-telepathically. Yes, sir.
Sovereignty of God and the relationship with Christ.
Great. So we're talking about some of the theology of the songs that we sang, and how good they were. Some really rich lyrics. That's fantastic. Good. Anything else you want to say? Yeah.
Getting in tune with God before the word.
Getting into so it can be seen as good preparation of our hearts to be ready to receive God's word and to talk about that. That's great. Yeah, out the back, nice and loud.
The priority of it, the fact that it came before anything else, to tell us how we value it.
Great. So we did it first because we wanted to say, God, you're at the center of what we're about. That's good. Yes.
It inspires. We've just come from Egypt, and we don't hear this kind of singing there. And of course, it's in Arabic. I don't understand what they're saying. So it's wonderful.
Okay. Good. So we're engaging our emotions, aren't we? We're expressing it verbally. We're getting our bodies involved, our lungs, our voices, our mouths to kind of confess God's praise. And it's not just cerebral. We're engaging our hearts. That's really helpful. Good. Yes, sir.
I guess I like Margaret's quotes of the old church fathers, the prayers, if you like, that remind us that our faith is rooted in history.
Brilliant. So we're joining with the great kind of cloud of witnesses of the past, so that we're not kind of trapped in our own time zone, as it were. I'm experiencing time zone lapse, so I can understand that a bit. But we're connecting with our brothers and sisters from history and allowing them, although dead, to still speak to us. That's really powerful. Brilliant. You guys are lovely. If we did this in England, it would have been a bit more hostile. So people would have said, "Oh, you didn't sing my favourite song, and why did we sing that song? Too many songs from this century, or too many songs from that century," and we would have been quite critical. So I love Canadians. You guys are amazing. We often, and maybe this is just an English thing, but our family often reviews worship as we walk home from our church service. And you know my little tribe of kids that I've got, and so the older ones will sometimes go, "Well, it was a bit boring today, and the music was a bit out of tune, and the preacher, boy, he went on for ages, and he said the same stuff he said last time." And I'll say, "Yeah, kids, I'm sorry, I wasn't on form this week, and I'll try and do better." But often when we review our worship, it is about what it did for us. We are at the kind of center of the decision-making process of whether it was good worship or not. Does that make sense? And it struck me, I do a lot of work with university students, and it was great. I was slightly asleep, but they were really awake last night in the after-hours session that we had. It was great to spend time with some of the residents and the undergraduates that are here. But when I talk to university students, they're an interesting sample group of Christians, because often in the UK anyway, people have left home and have gone to a university in another town or city, and so they've changed their local church. And I'll often ask students, how did you choose the church that you ended up going to? And I wonder if you can guess what the top 3 reasons are why students chose the church that they chose.
Music?
Music is definitely up there in the top 3. Often it is they had music that was nothing like my church back home. And, it's my kind of music. Or that we have celebrity worship leaders in the UK. I don't know if you do over here. But I went to the church where this particular worship leader was leading worship. And it was great. It's like a rock concert every Sunday. And for some people, it's the sung worship and the music that is a defining influence. What do you think the other two might be? Yeah.
Preaching and friendliness.
Okay, preaching, let's start with that one. Yes, often the people that are not choosing their church based on the singing are choosing it based on the preaching. It's really rare to find someone that's looking for both, or a church that's kind of prioritised both. But the preaching, and I want to go somewhere where I can be really fed. Does that have you heard that kind of language? I really want to grow in my faith, so I'm going to a church where I'm going to be really fed and nourished in my faith. Good. Give me a third one, anyone? Yeah. Community. Okay, a bit. Yeah. Time. Yeah. If they have an evening service, that's always helpful. Some students, not medical students, of course, but some students never see midday, and so an evening service is a good one. Community. Yeah, partly. Looking for a spouse. Often up there. They don't admit that to me, though. Friendliness, yeah, okay. Maybe it's a different culture, but in the UK, food. Food. So we have this kind of tradition of hospitality. Maybe you've got it here, I'm sure you have. And so students will often hang around, I did, at the end of a service, looking hungry. And families come and say, hey, do you need some food? And, they'll take you back to their house and you get to have lunch with the family. And it's great. It's lovely. I don't know if I was expected to, but I would often stay for an evening meal as well, which is wonderful. Very kind of them. So look, are those good things that students are looking to worship God with their voices in a musical form that will inspire, that they'll be preaching and teaching that will nourish them, and physical food and hospitality that they will... Are those good things? Yeah. Why am I slightly nervous though?
It's not the best line.
Who is at the centre of that decision-making process? It's all about me. I want to be fed, I want to sing, and I want food, physical food in my stomach. I have become the centre of my worship experience. Does that make sense? Now look, of course those are not wrong. I wouldn't tell a student to go somewhere where they only have, out of tune, Albanian music, I love Albanian music, but they don't preach from the Bible, but they preach from the Quran each week, and they'll never feed you. I wouldn't say that, but I would want to say, look, one of the reasons that you go to be part of a church community is not just to receive, but to give. Would you consider looking for a church where you might be able to make a contribution, where your skills and gifts might be able to bless and help? And so rather than looking for the finished article, you might look for a church where your gifts and skills could be useful to others. We in the UK, maybe it's very different over here, but we've turned church into a consumptive experience. It's all about me. And sadly, often the same is true for our worship. I want to get something out of this. I want to be fed. I want to be helped. But when we review worship, I think we need to be flipping that on its head. Who is actually the only person that is capable of reviewing our worship? Surely it's God himself. And so we need to brace ourselves this morning, because we're going to look at a very difficult passage to kick off. We're going to end up in Psalm 68 later, but I want you to open up your Bibles to Isaiah 1. And Isaiah 1 is one of the most harrowing passages that I know about in the Bible. And, we all know the book of Isaiah. Well, we all know chapter 53 of the book of Isaiah, and maybe Isaiah 40 if you're particularly biblically literate, and maybe Isaiah 58 if you're an expert. But weirdly, we often skip over Isaiah chapter 1. And when I read bits of it to you this morning, you might be able to understand why. Let me read to you from verse 13. This is God speaking to his people Israel. And before he's opened up these words, he has called them Sodom and Gomorrah. So you might think he's speaking to Sodom and Gomorrah, but no, he's likening Israel to Sodom and Gomorrah. Here's what he has to say. God says, stop bringing meaningless offerings. Your incense is detestable to me. New moons, Sabbaths, and convocations. I cannot bear your evil assemblies. Your new moon feasts and your appointed festivals, I hate with all my being. They have become a burden to me. I am weary of bearing them. When you spread out your hands in prayer, I will hide my eyes from you. Even if you offer many prayers, I am not listening. Your hands are full of blood. That is a harrowing review of Israel's worship. And at one level you think, well, God, are you being fair here? You're telling Israel off for gathering to worship, but you command them to gather to worship. You're telling Israel off for singing and offering sacrifices, but God, your Levitical law tells Israel that they ought to be offering sacrifices. God, you're even saying you're going to be deaf to the prayers of your people. But surely, God, you command your people to pray. Why are you so angry? What is it that they are doing wrong? I think the issue when you look at the book of Isaiah is not necessarily what the people have done, it's what they've left undone. Worship has become something reduced to gathering together, to sing, to pray. It was supposed to be more than that. Here's where he goes next, Isaiah in the passage, verses 16 to 17. Wash and make yourselves clean. Take your evil deeds out of my sight. Now here are a list of 6 things he wants them to add to their worship. Stop doing wrong, learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. God says to Israel, your worship cannot just be the gathering of people for a weekly or a monthly or however often you're going to meet service. Your worship is the offering up of all that you are, but it must include engagement with issues of justice and poverty. Now, how are those two things linked? Why does God want both together? Why does he call his people to an intimacy with him, a relationship with him, but also to activism? Well, maybe the best way I can help you think about that is a little illustration. My oldest son, his name is Joel, and he's 15 years old. He is taller than me already, which is incredibly embarrassing. And it's really hard to tell someone off when you're having to look up to them. Most of you Canadian men have never had this problem, but this is one that I wrestle with. Anyway, he's a good lad, and he really enjoys cycling. And he will often cycle to school. We live not too far away from his senior school, and so he cycles. Rain or shine, he will cycle. I want you to imagine just somehow that my son's cycle route to school takes him past your house. I know that's complicated and difficult, but let's just go with it for the sake of illustration. And one morning he's cycling, but it's icy. And he comes round to a bend near your house, and his back wheel of his bike gets caught on some ice and it flips out underneath him, and he goes skimming across the road, skinning his legs in the process. And he's injured, but he recognises your front door. And so he manages, just crawling only on his elbows, to make it to your door. And he begins to knock at your door. And I don't know what Canadian front doors look like, but let's assume you've got a letterbox where the mailman's going to put your letters through. And he shouts out to you through the letterbox, please, please let me in. And you see him there and you recognise it's my son, even though he's tall. He looks a bit like me. And you decide now is a good time to reconnect our friendship. And so you open up your laptop and you go onto Twitter, or you go onto Facebook, or maybe you just begin to compose me an email. And you remember the good time that we had here in the Horseshoe Ranch, as it is. And you compose a poem just to express just how much you'd got out of the time that we'd spent together. And, it was a beautiful poem. It could have been in iambic pentameter. The lines could have rhymed. It's a thing of great beauty. And you mail it to me, send it off on the email, and I receive this message, and it's just lovely. You Canadians, you're not just nice to your worship leaders, you're nice to your preachers too. This is fantastic. But you leave my son on the doorstep. Now, how do I feel? When I find out that you've sent me a wonderful poem of praise and friendship, but you did nothing to care for my son, your words are meaningless. I'll destroy the email. I'll put it in the trash. I'll probably write a rude one back. I detest the email that you've sent me. How dare you do this? There's nothing wrong with the words that you said, but your actions didn't match the friendship you were professing. Does that make sense? But let's imagine it the other way around. My son comes off his bicycle, skids out across the road, makes it to your front door, screams out to you, and you see him there. And you open the door, you welcome him into your house, and using all your medical training, you bandage his wounds, and you make him a hot mug of cocoa, and then with another responsible adult, you put him in your car because there's child protection issues here, and you drive him to my house. Now how is our friendship doing? You don't even need fancy words. I don't need your poem. What you've done for my son cements our friendship, doesn't it? Now here's the thing. God says to Israel, what you have done, okay, that's not the problem. It's what you've left undone. You haven't shown justice. You haven't defended the oppressed. You haven't taken up the cause of the fatherless. And you haven't pled the case of the widow. You need to do both. That is what God counts as worship. And so this thing we were looking at yesterday, this idea of an adopting God, this is something we have received by the grace of God in our lives. We didn't deserve it. All of us were broken and sinful. All of us had got ourselves trapped in the depravity of addictive behaviors that were sinful and enslaved us. We're in slavery to the law. But God looked beyond all that. And God, the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, launched a rescue mission. And by the grace of God, rescued us and called us into family with God. Now, what are we supposed to do with that? How should that affect the way that we engage the wider world? Let me show you a passage from Deuteronomy. And if you've got a Bible, open it up to Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 17. This is God's instructions to Israel. It's very small on the screen. Don't worry, I'll just read it to you. Here's what God says to his people as he reinstitutes the law to them. Verse 17, do not deprive the foreigner or the fatherless of justice, or take the cloak of the widow as a pledge. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. That is why I command you to do this. When you are harvesting in your field and you overlook a sheaf, do not go back to get it. Leave it for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat the olives from your trees, do not go over the branches a second time. Leave what remains for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. God says, remember who you were. We talked yesterday that we've got a new identity in Christ. That is so important, isn't it? And part of our problem is that we relapse into old behaviours because we haven't remembered who God has made us, that we're now his children. We're no longer living under fear, no longer living under slavery. But that doesn't mean you try to forget the past. God says, I want you to remember what I did for you, Israel. You were in slavery. You were strangers. You were a nation without a father, it seems. But I intervened. Remember that, so that your heart is softened to those that are in need. Friends, we were adopted. We didn't deserve it. We didn't do anything to merit it. God in heaven was not lonely. He wasn't thinking, I wish there were some extra children in my life. God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit were in perfect communion. They were all sufficient. We talk about the doctrine of the aseity of God, that God is satisfied in himself. He has everything he needs. And yet, God intervened due to his compassion and got involved in our world. God has set a standard for us about what it means to live in the world by the way that he has behaved in history. Now, friends, I want you to ground this in what's happening not around the world, but here in Canada. Today, 30,000 children in Canada are waiting for a family. 30,000 children. Now, I thought we had a problem in the UK, and we do. That's what I'm giving my life to, is to try to find adoptive families for all the kids that are left behind in the British care system. Our population is around 50 million, but in the British care system, we've got 6,000 children waiting for adoption. Okay, that's terrible. But you guys, you've got 30,000 children waiting for adoption. Now, the big question is, whose responsibility are those children? To whom does God hold accountable for the well-being of the vulnerable in our society? That's an interesting question. Let me take you on a bit of a journey. If you've got another a Bible on you, have a look at Psalm 68. I want to start here, and then I want to give you some very practical ways forward. Okay, I call this psalm the Indiana Jones psalm. Growing up in the 80s, Harrison Ford, or as he's known in Norway, Harrison Fjord, was the ultimate coolest person in the world. He obviously was the best person in the Star Wars universe because he was Han Solo. And then if that wasn't cool enough, he then got to be the coolest person ever. He was Indiana Jones, you know, archaeology professor by day, adventurer by night. And you might remember the first and best of the Indiana Jones movies was Raiders of the Lost Ark. Do you know it? Oh, yeah. Great film, right? And it's a brilliant idea that if the Nazis can get hold of the Ark of the Covenant, they have the ultimate weapon of mass destruction. Because the Ark of the Covenant is a guaranteed surefire hit. You will win any war as long as you have the Ark of the Covenant before you. That was the thinking. That was the logic behind the film. And this psalm, Psalm 68, is about the Ark of the Covenant. These words used at the beginning here were the words that were used whenever the Ark of the Covenant was moved from one place to another. Okay? So let me read it to you and have Indiana Jones kind of a little bit in your mind. Psalm 68, verse 1. May God arise. May his enemies be scattered. May his foes flee before him. May you blow them away like smoke. As wax melts before the fire, may the wicked perish before God. Another reason I'm thinking of Indiana Jones. You might remember the end of the movie where the Nazis dare to open up the Ark of the Covenant. Do you remember? And when they open it up, the angel of death comes out and flies around. And this could almost be a description of what happens, isn't it? May you blow them away like smoke, as wax melts before the fire. May the wicked perish before God. Everybody melts, don't they, when the Ark of the Covenant is opened, except for Indiana Jones and his girlfriend, soon-to-be wife, because they have their eyes closed. Somehow, that, rather than the Passover lamb or whatever you need, is sufficient to ward off the powers of the angel of death. Anyway, so look, you're tracking this. Are you with me? So the idea, the Ark of the Covenant, you take it out, it will blow your enemies away, it will make them melt like wax, it will turn them into smoke. But may the righteous be glad and rejoice before God. May they be happy and joyful. Sing to God, sing in praise of his name. Extol him who rides on the clouds. Rejoice before him. His name is the Lord. Now this is really brilliant because in this psalm, God is helping Israel to get the right picture about what the Ark of the Covenant is. God is the one who rides on the clouds. He's not contained in a tiny little box. God is sovereign. He's majestic and transcendent. He's above everything. Don't for a minute think you've contained God if you have him in the ark. It doesn't work like that. And Israel's history proves that. There are times they went out to war and they had the Ark of the Covenant and they didn't win. In fact, the ark got captured if you read the book of Judges, right? So it's a mess. This idea that if you just have God on your side, he will always guarantee you victory. And again, in the film Indiana Jones, I wonder, Raiders of the Lost Ark, I think Steven Spielberg, the director, obviously from a Jewish background, gets it right a little bit. Because one of my favourite bits in the movie is when the Nazis have actually got the Ark of the Covenant, they put it in a box, and they put the Nazi insignias on the outside of it, and then they put it in a submarine. And they're going to take it to a secret base in an island somewhere. And it's miles, it's the other side of the world, because they've come from Israel, and they've got to get to this kind of island. I think it might even be the Galapagos Islands or something. It's miles away. But Indiana Jones is on the case. He's on the outside of the submarine, holding on. And, it's a submarine, but no, the Nazis didn't think about diving. It just goes along the surface to the Galapagos Islands. And maybe it was more fuel efficient that way. Who knows? But during the journey, the box in which the Ark was contained in, the insignias are burnt off. And it's almost as if Spielberg is saying, you cannot contain God. He does not belong to any particular political ideology or party. He is sovereign. He'll bust out of any box that you dare to put him in. And so that's some of the theology within this psalm. God is mighty and powerful and majestic. He is to be feared and held with great esteem. But what does God do with all this power? For whom does God employ that power and majesty and might? Have a look at how this majestic God is described. A father to the fatherless, a defender of widows is God in his holy dwelling. God sets the lonely in families. He leads out the prisoners with singing, but the rebellious live in a sun-scorched land. The God that we worship, he is a protector of widows and orphans. His vision for orphan children, and we need to be really careful about the translation of the word orphan into the context in which we live. In Britain, we never use the word orphan to describe kids waiting in the care system. They are vulnerable children. Orphan sounds too much like, Oliver Twist. It's kind of Dickensian kind of picture. And to be honest, most of the kids waiting in care, their parents are still alive. They're just not able to care for them. And many of you have been involved with them, won't you? You know that some of them it's got addiction issues, some of it's psychological challenges, some of it's a history of abuse that they've received, and now it's kind of repeating again with their children. And so God says it's for these, the vulnerable in our society, that I want to employ my power. I want to be on the side of these that are in need. And so then the question comes, if we are to be a godly people, what should our responsibility be to those who are vulnerable in our society? What about those children that are waiting in Canada, in the UK, for adoption? What's the church's responsibility to them? I want to show you a little, let me take you on a journey and then I'll show you a little video about it. We have been trying to change the way that the church in the UK thinks about adoption. And one of the challenges is that when we mention adoption, I hinted at this yesterday, the only people that think about adoption tend to be couples who, for whatever reason, have reached a stage of infertility. And they've tried natural birth, they've tried IVF, and there's all sorts of views, even in this room, about whether that's a good approach. And adoption is the last possible way that someone would consider having a child. And the problem is, if that's your journey to adoption, you probably really, really want a baby. But in the UK system and in the Canadian system, babies are not easy to come by. The 30,000 children waiting for adoption, they're not babies. They're older children, they are in sibling groups, many of them have additional needs, and so they're not the ones that people want. And if we're not careful, in the same way that our worship can become a consumerist experience, our approach to adoption can become one too. Adoption is for those people who need a baby or need another child. It's not for me. But actually that's not what God would say. We saw in Isaiah 1, defending the cause of the widow and the orphan. James 1:27 is a very famous verse. Do you remember what it says? Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and blameless is great hospitality on a Sunday, food for the kids and the visiting students, fantastic preaching and wonderful singing. No. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and blameless is to care for widows and orphans in their distress. So I would say the God-appointed group of people who have responsibility for the vulnerable in our society are us. And actually in the UK church is being put to shame by non-Christian people who, out of a sense of compassion, from all sorts of walks of life, Muslims, atheists, gay people, straight people, single people, old people, young people, are saying, I want to help kids that are in need. While the church remains, sadly, quite ambivalent to it. It's someone else's problem. We're busy. There's so much to be done. There are programs to be run. Busy at work, busy everywhere. And so these kids are someone else's problem. I'd like to say that cannot be the church's response. That our engagement with this issue cannot just be an intellectual or a monetized level. We've got to get our hands dirty. We've got to get involved. Let me tell you one story, and then I want to tell you some practical ways that we've been trying to do things in the UK, and then I'd love to pick your brains about what this could look like in Canada. So it was Boxing Day. Do you have Boxing Day? It's the day after Christmas, same here. I don't know why we call it Boxing Day, maybe you do, fill me in later. And there's a tradition in our church that we have a massive football game. And we were out in a field, and my pastor, he's a big guy, he's really competitive. He was absolutely adamant that his team was going to win. And his family were there with him, his wife and his 3 kids. And he went up to take a free kick. So someone had committed a foul. He's going to take a free kick. And he was just bragging how he was going to curl it around. It was going to go into the top corner of the net. This would win the game. And he would look like a hero to his children. It was a wonderful moment. And he runs up, but he completely misses the ball, slips over, and then is rolling around on the floor. Now, he's a supporter of a football team that has a bit of a reputation for play acting when someone is injured. And so we were teasing him about this, and then we turned him over, and his kneecap was halfway up his leg. And so we realised maybe he wasn't play acting. And at this stage, his children run onto the pitch. They're in tears. They're desperately sad. And we phone 999. We're phoning 911. Maybe it's over here. And it's Boxing Day. We're not expecting anyone to come out. But amazingly, in 15 minutes, there is an ambulance there. And he's in a lot of distress. And so his wife needs to go with him in the ambulance to kind of keep him calm. Leaving 3 children on the touchline. Now, it's Boxing Day. We've got hardly any food left in the refrigerator because my family are gannets. You know, they're just like a plague of locusts going through food. I've got my mother-in-law coming. That's always an interesting experience in itself. We've got other people come. You know, we're busy, okay? No food left, other things to do. So we just left those 3 kids in the field by the side of the football game, didn't we? Of course we didn't. Neither would you. You recognise they are in need. It's not about whether I fancy having 3 extra kids around on a day. This is about what they need. Are you with me? And so you make room. What's the difference between those kids waiting on a football pitch and the 30,000 kids waiting in the care system in God's eyes? Absolutely nothing. In the UK, we're trying to change adoption so that people stop thinking that adoption is for people that want kids in their lives. We're saying this isn't about parents finding the kids they've always wanted, because you'll always have a shopping list, won't you? The kind of kid that I want has no needs, it's got blue eyes, it's a little girl or it's a little boy, and that's what I want. I come with a list. This is not about you getting the kids that you want. This is about kids getting the parents that they need. And that's another ball game altogether. Suddenly a whole other group of people become involved. people who have had kids and the kids have left home, people who are childless maybe, people who are single, people that from the rest of the church that could stand alongside these couples and families to say, look, we'll offer you the support that you need to help these kids find the homes that they need. Let me tell you a quick story, and then I need to, how am I doing? Oh, you haven't put a sign up yet, so maybe I'm okay.
You're okay?
Oh, good. Okay, here's the situation. I want you to imagine this lad. Okay, we're at home. We've been given warning, about an hour's warning, that we're going to have a new guest in our house. And the social worker turns up in a pretty beaten up car, and this huge lad comes out of it dragging a pink suitcase that obviously does not belong to him. But all his worldly possessions are in this pink suitcase. And it's pretty obvious why he's been taken into emergency care, because there is a massive gash down the side of his face. I thought someone had used a knife on him, but it turns out his own mother had used her fingernails just to scar his face. She'd also poured boiling water down his arm. This lad has come straight from hospital to our home, and there he is, kind of huddled over, no eye contact, turned in on himself. And the social worker says her goodbyes, and then there he is in our lounge. And what are we possibly going to do? We're trying to make small talk. How do you make small talk to someone who has experienced this level of trauma? You guys are probably experts at it, because you meet people in these kind of need situations often, I guess. But we do our best, and we're trying to reach out and talk to him, but nothing's happening. And then I watched my two older boys do something great. They used a therapeutic tool that I wasn't aware of. It's called an Xbox 360. And they say to this lad, do you fancy a game of FIFA, which is a soccer game? And it turns out this lad is a big supporter of a football team called Arsenal. And I've done something wrong in the formation of my son. He also is an Arsenal supporter. And but it's all right. For this evening, our new lad, he's going to be Arsenal, and my two boys are going to be Manchester United. And somehow Arsenal wins 5-0 that night. And there are proud moments in a father's life, and that was one of them, when I listened to my boys saying, good shot, mate, well done. Hey, you've played this before. How did you get past my keeper? Really good. And you can see the lad just beginning to feel a little bit more comfortable in his skin, relaxing a bit. And then it's dinner time. And, what do you cook someone who's had that kind of experience? So we just cooked everything we had in the freezer and just laid it all out. And he was the lad that was grabbing it all. That was the one I was telling you about yesterday. But it turns out his favourite food that he'd never had before, it's called chicken Kievs. Do you have them over here? It's like chicken on the outside, a little sauce in the middle. Brilliant. These are amazing. Where do these come from? You guys are incredible cooks. And we're thinking, yeah, we just got it out of the freezer and kind of stuck it in the oven. But chicken Kievs, that's what we had 5 nights in a row. Because it was the only thing we could cook that we knew he liked. But you would have done the same, wouldn't you? Of course you would. And then we realised he doesn't have a toothbrush. It was a massive pink suitcase, but they didn't grab him a toothbrush. And so we go down to the local supermarket, and it's me, him, my 2 older boys, and I'm like, I'm the lead hen, and they're my little chicks following me down the aisles. And I must have gone through the whole shop about 5 times. I couldn't find toothbrushes anywhere. And then he cracks a joke. He says, you, Krish, you don't know where anything is in this place. I bet you never come here. I thought, brilliant. This lad, earlier he couldn't say a word. Now he's cracking a joke with us. And I tell you, I felt connected to the God who describes himself as a father to the fatherless. I love singing. We've had some beautiful singing. I love that. But there are worship moments in our lives that are nothing to do with gathering in a church and singing songs. There are times when we feel that we are connecting with God because we're doing the work he called us to do. Maybe you've experienced that in your practice. As you care for the needy, as you bandage the wounds of those from all sorts of situations, you're connecting with a God who is a father to the fatherless, a protector of widows and orphans. Now, why do I tell you that one story? That's one kid. And that happy ending, it didn't have a happy ending. This lad needed to be in long-term foster care. He's never going to go back to his mum or dad. He's separated from his brothers and sisters. He can't go visit his cousins. He's carrying scars on the outside, scars on the inside. But we got a call from his school. And they did a review of the year. All the kids had to kind of make a little collage of good times in their year. And he was asked, what was the highlight of your year? And he said, it was the time I spent with the Kandiahs. I broke down in tears when they told me that. That you'd had the opportunity to put something good into someone's life that was going so bad. But why do I tell you that one story? That's a crazy story. It's just one kid. Well, you know the old story, really old story. I'm sure you've even preached it many times. You know the boy walking along the beach, you know that one? Comes across 1,000 washed up starfish, drying out in the sun. What does he do? He picks up one of the starfish, he runs to the side of the beach, he's about to throw it in, and then, I don't know why it's always told this way, but an older person, it's a bit harsh on older people, an older person intercepts him and says, why do you bother? It doesn't make a difference. Remember what he says? Makes a difference to this one, throws it back in the sea. Now look, that story is really out of date. Because nowadays, if a boy was walking along a beach and he came across 1,000 washed up starfish, he would do what we're going to do now. Jennifer, could you come here? Jennifer's in charge of social media at the conference, and you might want to smile for this moment. Because a teenage boy walking along a beach discovering 1,000 washed up starfish, what would he do? He'd take a picture on his smartphone. And if he didn't have a smartphone, he'd use a BlackBerry. And sorry, that was really harsh. Okay. Is it a Canadian company? Yes. Oh, okay, right. Good stuff. So he'd take a picture and he would post that picture where? On Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on Snapchat, on Pinterest. He'd put it everywhere he could. And do you know what? I don't think it would take long before he'd have 1,000 people down on that beach. Each one of them picking up a starfish. Each one chucking them back into the sea. And they wouldn't just have to make a difference to one. You could make a difference to all of them. Look, in the UK, we have a less church attendance than you do here in Canada. In the UK, we've worked out that we need 6,000 more adoptive families and we need 9,000 more foster families. That's a big, big number. The government is absolutely desperate in the UK for help. Well, I work for the Evangelical Alliance. It's a bit like the EFC, but based in England. And we're connected with 15,000 churches. How's your maths? It's only one family per church that steps forward for fostering and adoption and then is supported to do so. And do you know what? The UK church could meet the entire need at the moment in the care system. Now think about what that would do. Think about what it would do for those kids. In the UK, if a child grows up in care and then stays in care until they're 18, they age out at that stage. And then sadly, for many of them, they get into all sorts of trouble again because they've got no network, no family to support them, no parents to go, I don't think that's a good idea. And so loads of them end up in our homeless population. 50% of the male prison population in the UK under 25 are young people that have aged out of the care system. You know, we have social problems coming out of our ears at the moment, and a lot of it are kids that have come through the care system and no one looked after them. Now the UK church is doing something exciting. We're getting involved with food banks and prison ministry, homeless ministry, brilliant. But wouldn't it have been better to get involved earlier, to intervene before those kids got into that situation? Now, I don't think we can rescue all these kids. They'll always travel with lots of challenges in their lives. We need to be realistic. And those lists of orphan heroes that we talked about yesterday, they can paint quite a rosy picture of some of the kids in the care system, can't they? You know, the kids waiting to be adopted are not like the kids in Despicable Me, or they're not cute like little orphan Annie in Annie, or they're not Anna Green Gables, you know, cleverer and more together than the parents that end up looking after her. No, these kids come with trauma. We've got to be real about this. But we could make a difference in their lives. Secondly, we can make a difference to our churches. I said yesterday that the UK church, maybe it's different here, is incredibly middle class. Our engagement with the poor is hit and run. You know, come and receive some goods, then off you go. Go back to your poverty. You know, you're not welcome here. It's at arm's length. We're a service provider. We'll come and bless you, and then off you go. But if you do adoption or fostering, it changes your relationship with the poor. I don't know if you noticed it in Deuteronomy. Did you see that God said, when you're going through your fields, don't go and harvest too closely. Make sure there's some left for the poor. But he didn't say, collect it up and then do an aid run into the poor ghetto and then leave again. You see that? You know what you're supposed to do? You're supposed to invite the poor in amongst you, into your property, onto your fields. Allow them to gather. There's two things there. One is proximity. Jesus said, the poor you will always have among you. They're supposed to be family. They're supposed to be relationally close to us. But secondly, it's responsibility, isn't it? He's not wanting to create dependency. We're not just going to drop aid on you and then run. We're not just going to send you $20 a month and then hope you'll be okay. No, we want to empower you to be able to provide for yourself. But we're going to be generous in the way that we do that. So there is responsibility, but we're going to be generous as well. Come in amongst, harvest for yourself. We'll get around you and support you. Now, when it comes to fostering and adoption, when you bring vulnerable children into your family, their needs become your needs. So we looked after a little lad. He was from Nigeria, most cutest little lad you'd ever imagine. And when we first met him, well, before we met him, we get the phone call that says, could you look after this child? And we said, yeah, sure. What can you tell us about him? They said, well, he's 3 years old. He's had 8 families. But the most important thing you need to know is that he is a biter. Now, a biter, he bites people. Now, I'm really nervous, thinking, my goodness, how's that going to work out? Got my own children, biting, doesn't sound like a good fit. But then I got angry. I said, seriously, you are summarising a little boy by telling me that he is a biter. My theology kicks in and says, no, that is not an adequate description of this lad. This lad is not a biter. That's not who he is. That's not his identity. This child is born in the image of God. He's loved by the eternal Creator who made the universe. He is a child that God would love to adopt into his family. He is a person of worth and value. He cannot be summarised by your diagnosis that he is a biter. Anyway, he came into our home. We loved him to bits. He was just gorgeous, lovely little lad. And what happened was this, that his dad had lied about his background. His dad had said he was a British citizen. He wasn't. He was a Nigerian citizen, and he had no right to remain, no legal immigration status in the UK. And so suddenly there's a little lad that has no right to remain in the UK, that has breakfast with us every day, that we love to bits. And immigration is not just an interesting headline in the newspaper. It's not just an intellectual debate that's happening somewhere. This is our issue. This is on us. Similarly, there was a little girl that we looked after. She had Down syndrome, but she also had loads of mobility, hypermobility in her legs and stuff. And we had to fight like crazy to make sure that she got adequate provision in the school that she was going to go to. Suddenly access, issues relating to disabilities, those are not just interesting conversation topics, those are our issues. You see, if the poor become family to us, then their needs become our needs. And the church begins to fight and change for those needs. So if we got involved, it would be great for those kids. But you know what? It would be great for our churches. We begin to model what Christ told us to model. That love and compassion and care for those that are in need. We don't commit the same problem that I was talking about yesterday on the Titanic. The church is not a first-class lifeboat trying to rescue nice people like us. The church is open all doors. It's a family for everybody. However broken you are welcome here. Sadly, many people tell me that to bring a child from the care system, the hardest place to bring them is the church. Because everyone's tutting. Everyone's looking down. Everyone's got their arms crossed going, I'm not really sure these kids are welcome here. I remember meeting a mother in the parking lot of a church crying her eyes out because the Sunday school would not receive her son because he couldn't sit still. Why couldn't he sit still? Because he was autistic. That's why he couldn't sit still. And he's on the autistic spectrum. He, hyper alert to all things that are going around him. And the program that Sunday school was offering was not going to work for him. So he was not welcome. Do you know what that did? That de-churched that child but it de-churched the mother too. We ought to be the most welcoming family on this planet, shouldn't we? And so I've heard wonderful stories of churches that have said, okay, we are going to make sure that everybody is genuinely welcome here. What's the training that we need to make that possible? We're going to change our language. At the end of a service, we're not going to say, mums and dads, go and pick up your kids. We're going to say mums and dads and carers, because that says that everybody, whatever your social background, they're welcome here. I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to find a way that, because of the way things work with some foster carers, we know that life is tough. They might have their own birth kids and they have hard to look after foster kids. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to wrap around those families with additional care. How about we appoint foster grandparents that can twin with some of these families? And here's a wonderful story. So on a Monday night, this older couple, they get alongside a younger foster couple and they say, look, we will take out whoever's in your house. They go to McDonald's and the cinema if there's a good film, and you guys can have a night off. Some people telling me being a grandparent is the good bit of parenting, because you get to spoil the kids, you get all the fun. Well, do you know what? Being a foster grandparent is even better, isn't it? You get to give relief to a hard-pressed foster family, but you also get to be the heroes of these foster kids' eyes. McDonald's and the cinema is the highlight of any kid's week, right? So there's stuff the church can do. Another family, they'd said, we would love to foster, but social services says we can't. Our house is too small. You have to have a spare bedroom because a child from care cannot share a bedroom. They're too vulnerable. So you know what a wealthier family did? They said, we can't foster because of our own situation, but we are going to underwrite the rent on your house so that you can have a bigger house to be able to foster. Because that's what family does. This is not a consumptive experience where we turn up for preaching and singing and a bit of food. We're family together. When a foster or adopted child comes into the church, we all become foster adopted aunties and uncles. These are our kids on our watch. Does that make sense? I want to show you one video. Here it is. It's going to come from America. And Canadians, and oh, time is up. There you go. This is not going to last long. You forgot. That's okay. I'll show you this and then I'll hand over to my... I was all waiting for you. Anyway, that's okay. Let me show you this one little video. It comes from America. Americans, Canadians and English people get on with Americans about the same. But some Americans are awesome. Check out these guys. This is from a little church in a place called Possum Trot, Texas. I want to show you this.
Possum Trot, Texas. A town so tiny there are no stoplights or street names. A town so poor, the food bank has been closed for months. You might even think this town in the piney woods of East Texas has nothing left to give. But you would be wrong. How many children have been adopted through the church?
76.
16 years ago at Bennett Chapel Baptist Church, this congregation was down on its luck. They decided to make a change. Instead of asking for help, they decided to give it.
Your failure don't have to be your destiny, because you can change it.
And for Bishop W.C. Martin and his wife Donna, that change was recognizing there were those far worse off, and in many cases, they were children.
It's not a whole lot that we have to offer children right here in Possum Trot, but love, peace, and joy, and happiness. We can offer them that.
So they passed on a challenge to their congregation, asking everyone who could to provide a loving home for children in need. I would imagine the blessing has not been without struggle.
The challenge with the kids is not them really trusting the love that you have to give them unconditionally.
Many of these children are victims of neglect and abuse.
Yes, some of them was beaten and molested by family members, just most horrible things.
Josh, how was your day?
The Martins have adopted 4 children themselves and are just one of 25 families in Possum Trot who have adopted foster children. Ricky and Dorothy Cartwright have expanded their family with 5 children who they clearly dote on.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
The love is evident, and so are the challenges. Ricky took 2 extra jobs so Dorothy could stay home with the kids, and some of the children still struggle with their past.
My other mom hated me. That's why she gave us away. And every day I think about that. Why did she give me away? A change is coming. Change is coming.
For many of these children, the past will always be a part of them, but they prefer to look to the future. For the Lathan family, the future is a little more uncertain. Teresa Lathan and her husband Glenn have taken in 11 children over the years. But 2 years ago, Teresa fell sick with lupus.
It almost seems like it went from you taking care of all of these kids to now
they taking care of me.
Her children echo the love they have for her.
And no telling where we'd be if it wasn't for her.
So weak now, Teresa speaks in a whisper until she wants to make sure she is heard.
When you look back on it, do you have any regrets?
No, I don't.
Regret is not something you find a lot of in Possum Trot, but there are a lot of bills.
Our financial struggles, they're devastating. But you can't bring these kids into your home and not prepare them for their future.
Time is up. But did you hear that? You can watch, I'll show it to you later. Did you see, that church was not a massive church. It wasn't a mega church. There wasn't, 20,000 in the congregation or 6,000. That's a church of about 150. 76 children have been adopted into that church. Unbelievable. I met this guy. He is electric. We were at this mega church that had, that the children's area was bigger than this building. And he just came in there and said, I don't know what you guys are doing. How many kids are adopted in this church? And it was like 1. And he was just putting that church to shame with the meager, tiny little congregation, no money, no staff apart from him, but they had just said, this is on us. Religion that our God and Father accepts as pure and blameless is to care for widows and orphans in their distress. I'll tell you which church I'd rather be part of. Would you help us here in Canada? Would you help us to change the imagination of the Canadian church? That we make adoption so normal that you can't think about the church without thinking about adoption. That the practical hands-on adoption of those kids in need in our country becomes a living parable of the gospel that we have all enjoyed. I'll talk tomorrow about how those two things join up when we talk about evangelism.